The embers of the ancient kiln had not yet gone cold. The 800 pieces of rare porcelain his father had spent a lifetime collecting were smashed across the flagstones. Kiln Shaw knelt in the wreckage, his uncle's leather shoe grinding his wrist into the shards, and heard the words that would sever his life in two. From this day forward, there is no place for you in the Shaw family. White porcelain splinters drove into his palms. Kiln did not cry out. He only stared at the largest intact fragment among the debris, a piece of Rue Kiln celadone, its glaze the color of rain-washed sky, its crackle pattern finer than a cicada's wing. It was the last unfinished piece his father, Theodore Shaw, had been working on before he died. His Uncle Harold's heel came down with a sharp crack. 600 years of secret glaze formula turned to dust. "Get him out of here." Harold waved his hand. Two security guards hauled Kiln up by his arms and dragged him through the vermilion gates of the Shaw family estate. The massive doors slammed shut behind him. Above the entrance, the old plaque reading "Legacy of Ceramics" was pried down and replaced with a gilded corporate sign. Shaw Ceramics Group. Kiln knelt on the stone steps, porcelain fragments cutting into his knees, blood seeping through his trousers. He was 24 years old. Behind him came the laughter of his cousin Damien, and the brittle crash of more porcelain shattering against walls. Kiln did not turn around. His eyes fell on a single weed pushing through a crack in the stone steps, thin, yellowed but alive. He pressed his palms against the ground and stood. Blood from his knees ran down his shins into his shoes, sticky with every step. He pulled out his phone. The screen was cracked but still working. He dialed a number. It rang twice before connecting. "Finn, I need a favor." "Name it." "My mother." Someone pushed her down the stairs. "She's at Third People's Hospital emergency room. I need you to stay with her." Silence on the other end. Then a dull thud. A fist hitting sheet metal. "Who did it?" "Doesn't matter right now. Just get to the hospital." "I'm on my way." Kiln hung up and flagged down a taxi at the curb. The driver hesitated at the sight of him, blood-soaked, clothes torn. Kiln pulled 200 yuan from his pocket and slapped it on the passenger seat. The driver floored it. In the emergency room of Third People's Hospital, his mother, Lena Zhou, lay on a gurney. Bandages wrapped her forehead, dark red flowers blooming through the gauze. Her eyes were closed. Her breathing was shallow. Her left arm twisted at an unnatural angle. The doctors said cerebral contusion with intracranial hemorrhage, plus a fractured left arm. She needed surgery immediately. Kiln signed the surgical consent form without his hand trembling. The pen scratched across the paper with a sound like the fine, irreversible cracking of porcelain glaze. The surgery lasted 6 hours. When they wheeled her out, her head was wrapped in gauze, tubes running into her body from every direction, her face the gray-white of under-fired clay. The doctor said the surgery itself had been successful, but the intracranial bleeding had compressed the nerves. Whether she would wake up and what kind of damage might remain if she did, no one could say. Kiln sat in the corridor outside the ICU all night. The fluorescent lights were harsh and white, casting a cold, glazed sheen across the floor. He sat in the plastic chair, hands folded on his knees, motionless, like a piece of unfired clay waiting to enter the kiln. The next morning, his mother did not wake. The third day she did not wake. A week later, the doctor called Kiln into his office. His tone was measured, careful. "Mr. Shaw, your mother's condition. We recommend transferring her to a long-term care facility. She is currently in a persistent vegetative state. The possibility of her waking..." He paused. "It's not zero, but it will take time." Kiln nodded. He said nothing. He transferred his mother to a rehabilitation hospital on the north side of the city, prepaying 3 months of fees that wiped out every last yuan in his bank account. Then he returned to the old district and found a corrugated metal shed behind Finn's hardware store, about 400 square feet, half of it stacked with Finn's inventory, the other half partitioned off by a faded cloth curtain. That was where he would live. On moving day, he carried only a single canvas bag, a few changes of clothes and an old laptop. Finn helped him set up a folding cot inside. He looked around the space. "Kiln, this place is going to be an oven in the summer and a freezer in the winter. You really want to live here?" "It's fine," Kiln said. "Close to the kiln." Finn didn't understand, but he didn't press. He'd known Kiln for 5 years. He knew this man's temperament. When he didn't want to talk, asking was useless. That night, Kiln opened the old laptop and under the dim glow of a bare bulb, typed out a document. The title was 4 words. Operation Kiln Fire. The first page listed 3 names. Harold Shaw, Damien Shaw, Marcus Sue. Behind each name stretched a string of red annotations, dense with details about their assets, social connections, business empires, and vulnerabilities. After Harold Shaw's name, chairman of Shaw Ceramics Group, 37% equity holder, de facto controller. Personality: greedy, hypocritical, ruthless, pathologically eager to please the old patriarch Sebastian Shaw. Key weakness: South City Cultural Park project, total investment $15 billion, dangerously high debt ratio, tight cash flow. All 47 ceramic process patents in his name were stolen from his older brother Theodore Shaw. After Damien Shaw's name, Harold's son, design director of Shaw Ceramics, wears the persona of genius ceramic artist, but cannot even throw a pot. All original works plagiarize from Kiln. Key weakness: zero technical knowledge, falls apart without ghost designers. His Aurora Ceramic Design Studio is essentially a shell company. After Marcus Sue's name, Kiln's childhood friend, now manager of technical R&D at Shaw Ceramics, under Harold's direction, stole all of Kiln's original design manuscripts and glaze formula data, then turned around and gave false testimony accusing Kiln of stealing company trade secrets. Personality: cowardly, vicious, greedy, keeps 2 villas and 3 mistresses in the South District, spending far beyond his legal income. Key weakness: high probability of flipping, complete evidence chain already assembled. Kiln drew a circle around each name and slashed a red X through each circle. Then he opened a second document. This was his real hand. First page: Aurora Capital Equity Structure Chart. Through BVI companies in Cayman Islands SPV structures, Kiln Shaw held 73% of the shares. Total assets under management: approximately 6.3 billion yuan. Second page: Fellowship Certificate from the International Ceramic Materials Society, issued to Fire Watcher. Only 12 fellows existed worldwide. He was the youngest. Third page: Appointment letter as specially appointed ceramics restoration expert for the National Cultural Heritage Administration, personally recommended by Franklin by, President of the Ancient Ceramics Society. Approved just last month. Fourth page: A list of 19 papers published in top-tier international journals, spanning 3 fields: digital restoration of Song Dynasty Imperial Kiln glazes, non-toxic reformulation of Tang Dynasty Sankai lead glazes, and nano-level Kiln purification. Total citations: over 2,000. Fifth page: A joint project agreement between the British Museum and the Louvre, project titled Genetic Atlas of Ancient Silk Road Ceramic Glazes. Kiln Shaw was the chief scientist. Codename Firewatcher. These identities and achievements had been accumulating in the shadows for 5 years. For 5 years by day he laid tiles, fixed toilets, crouched at the mouth of the alley playing cards and shooting the breeze with neighbors. After 10 o'clock every night, he opened his laptop and used encrypted email to discuss molecular structure optimization of glaze formulas with the world's top materials scientists. In that tin shed in the old alley, he had written 19 papers, run over 1,000 glaze composition analyses on a second-hand spectrometer, and remotely participated in restoration strategy discussions for 3 of the British Museum's most treasured pieces. But in the light, he was just a tile shop owner in flip-flops. Harold Shaw had sent people to watch him. The first time 3 years ago, he sent a subordinate posing as a renovation client. The man walked through Kiln's shop and reported back. "He's done. The place is full of cheap off-brand tile. He crouches in the doorway smoking in broken sandals. I saw him lose 50 yuan at cards to the hardware store owner next door, and curse about it for half an hour." The second time, 2 years ago, Damien himself drove past the mouth of the alley and rolled down his window to look. Kiln was crouched in front of old Mrs. Zhang's house, unclogging her sewer, covered in mud, hair a mess like a chicken coop. Damien laughed, rolled up his window and drove on. The third time last year, Harold sent Marcus Sue to dig into Kiln's background. Marcus ran Kiln's bank records, social security, and tax filings through his connections. Everything was normal. Monthly income between 8 and 12,000. Minimum social security tier. No fixed assets. No anomalies. He sent Harold 5 words. He's broken. Not worth worrying about. Those were exactly the words Kiln wanted. He understood how people like Harold Shaw thought. They believed that once a person was crushed into the mud, they could never rise again, because they themselves had climbed up by stepping on others, and what they feared most was the day the people they had stepped on might stand back up. But once you convinced them you were broken, ruined, no longer a threat, they would relax their vigilance completely. They would pour all their attention and resources into expanding their territory, revealing one vulnerability after another. And all he had to do was wait. Like firing a kiln, raise the temperature degree by degree, endure the hours second by second, and at the precise moment, when the fire was at its perfect pitch, smash open the seal with a single blow. That moment had finally arrived. The night before the groundbreaking ceremony for Shaw Ceramics South City Cultural Park, Kiln sat in the tin shed making a final review of all his materials. Finn crouched in the doorway eating takeout, a rib bone in his mouth. Kiln, you're really going tomorrow? If that old bastard Harold sees you. He won't see me. Kiln shut down the computer and pulled the USB drive from the port, slipping it into the inner pocket of his work jacket. By the time he can see me, it'll be too late. The next morning at 9 o'clock, the site Shaw Ceramics had acquired on the south side of the city was decked with fluttering banners and floating balloons. A massive white tent stood at the center, red carpets rolled out, flowers and champagne towers everywhere. The stage backdrop was an LED screen the size of half a basketball court, looping Shaw Ceramics' corporate promotional video. On screen, Harold Shaw stood before a row of kilns, behind him neatly arrayed displays of fine porcelain. A rich baritone voiceover intoned, "Shaw Ceramics, inheriting a century of craftsmanship, forging the soul of Eastern porcelain." Harold Shaw stood on stage in a dark blue modified Zhongshan suit, his hair dyed jet black and gleaming. He was speaking into the microphone, his voice amplified through the sound system, reverberating across the venue. The Aurora Cultural Park is the starting point for Shaw Ceramics' global ascent. It will integrate a ceramics museum, an international design center, and a high-end commercial complex. Total investment of $15 billion, the largest cultural industry project in this city's history. Thunderous applause. In the front rows sat city officials and assorted VIPs. Damien Shaw occupied the most prominent seat, legs crossed, a Patek Philippe glinting on his wrist in the sunlight. Marcus Su sat beside him scrolling data on a tablet. They exchanged whispered comments, their faces smug with satisfaction. The old patriarch, Sebastian Shaw, sat dead center in the first row, his back ramrod straight, his silver hair immaculately combed. He was the founder of Shaw Ceramics, a man who had built an empire from nothing, his bones etched with a Jinhu Panjur, almost pathological need for control. He looked up at his younger son on stage, the corner of his mouth lifting, his gaze full of approval. No one noticed the man in the very last row in the corner. Kiln leaned against a temporary support pillar, an unlit cigarette dangling from his lips. His baseball cap was pulled low, covering most of his face. He wore the same faded blue work jacket, the same cracked plastic sandals. Of the 200-plus guests and journalists in attendance, not one gave him a second glance. He looked exactly like a migrant worker who had wandered in to enjoy the air conditioning. His phone buzzed in his pocket. Kiln glanced down. An encrypted message for words. "Everything is ready." The sender was a Swiss number. Kiln took the cigarette from his mouth, tucked it behind his ear and replied, "Begin." The giant LED screen on stage flickered. The corporate promo vanished. In its place appeared a yellowed photograph. An old man in a white lab coat and a teenage boy standing side by side before an ancient kiln, each holding a freshly fired celadone bowl, their smiles radiant. Below the photo, a handwritten line. Master Theodore instructs his disciple, autumn of the year of the dog. Kiln, age 14. Harold's smile froze on his face. His pupils contracted violently. He spun around to stare at the screen, his lips moving but no sound coming out. Whispers rippled through the audience. A reporter recognized the man in the photo. "Isn't that Theodore Shaw? The eldest son, the one who died 5 years ago. I heard his death wasn't exactly honorable. Shoo! The images on the screen continued to turn. A second document appeared. A ceramics process patent certificate. Patent title: a celadone glaze based on Song Dynasty imperial kiln formulas and its preparation method. Patent holder Theodore Shaw. The application date was 6 full years before any similar patent under Harold Shaw's name. A third document followed. A patent rights transfer agreement. Transfer: the late Theodore Shaw, signed by legal guardian. Transfer: Harold Shaw. The signing date: 2 months before Theodore Shaw's death. On the last page, someone had circled 3 critical items in red. The guardian's signature was Harold Shaw himself. The transfer price was 1 yuan per patent, 47 patents for a total of 47 yuan. And during the period when the agreement was signed, Theodore Shaw had been lying in the ICU on a ventilator for 3 full weeks, with medical assessments confirming he had lost legal capacity. Harold Shaw, while his older brother lay in a coma, had used his authority as legal guardian to buy 47 core technology patents, his brother's entire life's work, for 47 yuan. The audience detonated. 47 yuan? A female reporter shrieked. 47 patents sold for 47 yuan. That's cheaper than cabbage. Theodore Shaw was in a vegetative state. How could he possibly have signed anything? The guardian's signature is Harold Shaw himself. He represented his own brother to sell the patents to himself. A fourth image appeared. A bank transfer record. Payer: Shaw Ceramics corporate account. Recipient: a mining company in South China. Amount: 21 million. Memo: premium Kiln procurement. A fifth image followed. The mining company's business registration change record. The newly appointed legal representative was a man named Zhao Yongchang. And Zhao Yongchang's wife was the younger sister of Harold Shaw's own wife. In other words, Harold Shaw had funneled 21 million in company procurement funds to a company under his brother-in-law's name. Then a sixth image, a third-party quality inspection report, sampling the high-grade bone china exhibits Shaw Ceramics had delivered to a provincial museum the previous year. The conclusion was a single line in red. Aluminum oxide content 12% below national standard. Grade B product passed off as Grade A. 7th, 8th, 9th more documents tumbled across the screen like an avalanche. A fraudulent customs declaration for export tax rebates. Declared goods. High-grade art ceramics. Actual goods shipped. Ordinary household ceramics. The unit price difference was 100-fold. This single item alone represented at least 60 million in fraudulent tax rebates. A forged certificate of origin for raw materials, labeling ordinary Jiangxi Kiln as Jingdezhen Premium Porcelain Stone Kiln. The procurement price difference was 8-fold. The entire cha difference flowed into Harold Shaw's personal offshore account. An internal finance email from Marcus Su to Harold Shaw. The text unmistakably clear. Mr. Shaw, regarding last year's inflated stone procurement volumes for the South City project, the auditors are getting close to uncovering it. I recommend we balance the books on those shell companies first. The entire venue lost control. Reporters surged toward the stage like a swarm of enraged bees. Shutters clattered with the density of a rainstorm on a tin roof. Someone screamed. Someone was shouting into a phone. Someone crashed into the champagne tower. Crystal flutes shattering across the floor. Wine and glass shards spreading in a widening pool. The hostesses shrank into corners, too terrified to move. 2 security guards tried to maintain order, but were shoved and jostled by the surging crowd. Damien shot up from his chair, knocking over the small table in front of him, a teacup smashing to the ground. His face bone white, he sprinted toward the control booth screaming, "Turn it off! Shut down the screen! Who the hell is in the control booth?" The control booth door was locked. Inside, the operator was frantically pounding the keyboard, sweat pouring down his face, but everything on the screen was beyond his control. He turned and shouted at Damien through the door. "Mr. Shaw, the system's been taken over remotely. I can't shut it down." Harold Shaw stood on stage, both hands gripping the edges of the podium, his knuckles terrifyingly white. His complexion cycled from ruddy to ashen to iron gray in the span of seconds, his jaw muscles twitching, the collar of his Zhongshan suit soaked through with sweat. He was, after all, a veteran who had fought in the business trenches for decades. He knew that panic in a moment like this only made things worse. He drew a deep breath, forced a smile with every ounce of his strength, and leaned into the microphone. Members of the media. This is a malicious attack. An illegal hacking. Our legal team is already handling it. Before he could finish, sirens wailed from outside the venue. Not police cars. Prosecutors' office vehicles. 3 black government sedans pulled up at the entrance, the characters for procuratorate on their doors blazing white in the sunlight. 7 or 8 uniformed officers filed in. The man in the lead, wearing glasses, middle-aged, held a red letterhead document. He walked through the chaotic crowd and stopped directly in front of Harold Shaw. His voice was not loud, but every word was clear. Mr. Harold Shaw, we are from the Economic Crimes Investigation Division of the Provincial Prosecutor's Office. Based on evidence jointly referred by the National Cultural Heritage Administration and the Provincial Discipline Commission, you are suspected of falsifying cultural relic protection plans, altering construction blueprints, and destroying Tang Dynasty cultural strata in the ancient Kiln Site Conservation Development Project. You are also suspected of embezzlement, trade secret infringement, fraudulent export tax rebates, and multiple other economic crimes. We are hereby formally opening an investigation and executing compulsory measures against you. Harold's smile shattered completely. His lips trembled for a long moment before he forced out a hoarse, distorted sentence. What evidence do you have? The prosecutor, expressionless, opened the folder in his hand and held up the first page. A photocopy of the agreement transferring 47 patents for 47 yuan, the red-circled guardian's signature glaring. Then the second page, the bank receipt of the 21 million Kiln procurement payment to the company under the brother-in-law's name. Then the third page, a comparison of the final approved blueprints for the ancient Kiln site versus the original agreement blueprints. The foundation embedment depth changed from 6 meters to 12.7 meters, 3 additional basement levels added without authorization. Then the fourth page, the bone china quality inspection report confirming Grade B passed off as Grade A. Every page bore a bright red official seal. Every page bore Harold Shaw's personal signature, or that of his affiliates. Is this evidence enough? The prosecutor closed the folder, his tone as flat as if he were discussing the weather. If not, we have more. Harold's legs gave way. 2 bailiffs grabbed him by the arms on either side to keep him from collapsing to the ground. As they marched him through the crowd, reporters on both sides shoved their lenses into his face. The flashbulbs blinded him. The collar of his Zhongshan suit was askew. His hair was disheveled. One of his leather shoes had been trampled off. His stocking foot stepped on broken glass, and he didn't even notice. As he passed the last row in the corner, his footsteps suddenly stopped. He felt something, a burning sensation as if a gaze were drilling through the back of his skull, a chill running all the way down his spine. He jerked his head up and saw the young man standing in the corner, in the blue work jacket. Beneath the brim of the baseball cap, half a face was visible. The corner of the mouth held a faint curve, not a smile. It was the expression of a hunter watching prey finally step into the trap. Precise. Cold. Without a trace of pity. Harold's pupils constricted. Kiln pushed his cap up, revealing his full face. He took the unlit cigarette from behind his ear, put it between his lips, pulled out a lighter and flicked it. The flame danced in his pupils like fire leaping inside a kiln. Uncle. He exhaled a stream of smoke, his voice soft as a feather landing on porcelain. There are still 137 pieces of porcelain. Take your time paying them back. Harold was dragged out of the venue. He twisted around, trying to catch one last glimpse of Kiln, but the crowd was too dense, a forest of heads blocking his view. All he heard behind him was a laugh, very soft. Not a triumphant laugh. Not an angry laugh. The laugh of someone who had waited many, many years and finally reached this day. Damien was pinned down at the door of the control booth. He thrashed and screamed, the veins on his neck bulging. You can't arrest me. Those were my designs. My own work. I'm the design director of Shaw Ceramics. I've won international awards. A female prosecutor walked up to him and held up her phone. On the screen was a photo, Damien Shaw's award certificate from the Singapore International Ceramic Design Competition the previous year. The work was titled Echoes of Azure. The award category: Best Creative Design Gold Medal. Mr. Damien Shaw, did you personally design this award-winning work? Of course I did. Damien's neck was flushed red. I have the award certificate. The organizer's certification. I have. The prosecutor unhurriedly pulled another document from her folder and unfolded it. It was a U.S. Copyright Office original work registration certificate. The registered work was identical to Damien's award-winning piece, an Azure Celadon vessel titled Echoes of Azure. The registration date was 2 full years before Damien's competition entry. The registrant: Firewatcher. Nationality: China. Firewatcher, translated as Keeper of the Kiln, is the code name of a senior research fellow certified by the International Ceramic Materials Society. The owner of this code name. The prosecutor lifted her eyes, her gaze as precise and cold as a set of calipers. Submitted complete identity verification materials and copyright confirmation documents to our Ministry of Justice through Swiss diplomatic channels yesterday. His real name. Shall I read it aloud? Damien's lips were trembling. The prosecutor did not wait for his answer. She continued pulling items from her folder. Second document. Original lab records from the Ceramic Materials Laboratory of the Technical University of Munich, recorded by Firewatcher, dated 3 years before Damien's creation date. Third document. An expert opinion letter from the British Museum's Department of Eastern Antiquities, clearly stating that the glaze formula of Damien's award-winning work was completely identical to the digital restoration data of a Song Dynasty Guan Kiln Celadon piece in the museum's collection, and that the copyright holder of this restoration data was Firewatcher. Fourth document. An email confirmation from the organizers of the Singapore International Ceramic Design Competition, acknowledging receipt of an anonymous complaint and confirming the launch of an investigation that would strip Damien of his award and permanently ban him from future participation. Mr. Damien Shaw, you are suspected of intellectual property infringement and design copyright plagiarism, involving substantial amounts and egregious circumstances. Please come with us. Damien stared at the documents. His entire body, like a clay figure with its armature yanked out, slid slowly down the wall to the floor. His Patek Philippe struck the marble, a crack splitting across the crystal. The second hand stopped at 11:37. As they hauled him up and marched him out, he passed his own seat. On it still sat his half-finished glass of champagne and a promotional brochure with his photo on the cover. The cover bore a line of gilded text: Damien Shaw, the future star of Chinese ceramic design. The brochure was knocked to the floor by the wind. Someone stepped on it. A dirty shoe print stamped across the gilded words. The chaos at the venue took nearly 2 hours to bring under control. Over 100 media outlets captured the entire sequence in clear detail. The live broadcast signal streamed to every major platform. The top 3 trending topics were Shaw Ceramics collapse, Harold Shaw arrested, and Damien Shaw plagiarism. Shaw Ceramics stock hit the limit down within 3 minutes of the afternoon market opening, with sell orders exceeding $5 billion. Banks began calling to demand loan repayments. Suppliers gathered at the Shaw Ceramics headquarters, blocking the entrance, demanding payment. 2 overseas clients who had already placed deposits sent emails canceling their orders outright. And the man who had triggered this tsunami was already driving away from the scene in his battered old van. Finn was at the wheel, one hand on the steering wheel, the other slamming the horn, his face flushed crimson with excitement. Kiln, did you see the look on that old bastard Harold's face when they grabbed him? Like a fish pulled out of water. Mouth opening and closing. Couldn't say a single word. And Damien. I got video of that idiot collapsing on the floor. You want to see? Watch the road. Kiln leaned back in his seat, eyes closed. Finn glanced at him in the rearview mirror. He had expected Kiln to be laughing, slapping his thigh in triumph, telling him to crack open a bottle to celebrate. But Kiln's expression was neither excitement nor satisfaction. It was a deep, unreadable silence. Like an old kiln slowly cooling after the fire has been drawn. No more smoke rising from the outside, but the chamber within still scorching hot. Kiln. I'm fine. Kiln opened his eyes and looked out the window. The van was passing through the city's busiest commercial street. The giant screens along the storefronts were still scrolling the explosive news from the groundbreaking ceremony. The Shaw Ceramics logo appeared on one screen for 3 seconds before being abruptly switched to a blue screen. His gaze tracked the vanishing logo, like watching the last section of mast on a sinking ship slip beneath the water. "This is only the beginning," he said. "So what's next?" "We're going to Mrs. Zhang's," Kiln said. "I still haven't measured her stove." Finn stared at him for a beat, then burst out laughing. He yanked the steering wheel, and the old van turned into the familiar alley in the old district. Ivy covered the green brick walls on both sides. The cobblestones were pitted and uneven. The van drove through, kicking up a spray of muddy water. A few old men playing chess at the mouth of the alley glanced up at the license plate, then lowered their heads back to their game. They had long grown accustomed to the battered van coming and going. The van pulled up in front of the tile shop. Kiln got out. Mrs. Zhang was sitting on a tiny stool across the alley, shelling soybeans. She waved when she saw him. "Kiln, did you measure my stove yet?" Another tile fell off the countertop. "Tomorrow, Mrs. Zhang. I've got one more job today." Kiln lifted the bucket of cement from the van, set it by the shop door, and pushed inside. The tin shed was the same as always. Shelves stacked with cheap tile and hardware supplies. A half-cut piece of glazed ceramic still soaking in the water tray of the cutter. The ashtray on the workbench bristling with cigarette butts. Finn followed him in and slapped his phone on the table. "Kiln, check this out. Shaw Ceramics emergency board meeting has been going for 2 hours. I hear they're about to tear the roof off in there." The phone screen showed a financial media flash. Shaw Ceramics independent director Marcus, who presides over emergency meeting as company faces full-blown crisis. Kiln glanced at it, said nothing, and turned on the tile cutter. The high-pitched whine of the spinning blade filled the shop. Sparks flew from the cut, miniature fireworks in the dim light. That evening, the emergency board meeting at Shaw Ceramics headquarters dragged from 4 in the afternoon until 1 in the morning. The conference room was dense with smoke. Over a dozen directors and independent directors were at each other's throats. Harold was in custody. Damien was in custody. The company's legal representative and general manager were simultaneously absent. Banks were already calling to demand loan repayments. ICBC, China Construction Bank, China Merchants Bank, their credit departments taking turns, each call harsher than the last. Suppliers were blocking the lobby, demanding payment. Someone had unfurled a banner. "Shaw Ceramics, give us back our blood money." The stock had hit the limit down at opening, nearly $4 billion in market value evaporating in a single day. The man presiding over the meeting was the most senior independent director on Shaw Ceramics board, 71-year-old ceramics industry patriarch Marcus Hua. He sat at the head of the table, his graying eyebrows knotted into a tight furrow. The purple clay teapot beside him had been refilled 3 times. The tea was now as weak and flavorless as plain water. "This is not the time to assign blame." Hua's voice was hoarse but steady, like an old piece of porcelain smoothed by decades of wear. "The company cannot fall. If it falls, 3,000 workers lose their jobs. Dozens of suppliers go down with us. The impact on the upstream and downstream supply chain is even larger. We need to do 3 things right now. First, fully cooperate with the judicial investigation. Hand over every document they ask for. No covering up. Second, find a strategic investor. Lock in a capital injection plan as quickly as possible to stabilize cash flow. Third, appoint an interim management team. The company cannot remain leaderless." One director slammed the table in frustration. "A strategic investor? Who would invest in us right now? That bastard Harold has dragged the company's name through the mud. The banks won't even extend us loans anymore. What investor would be stupid enough to jump into a burning pit? There is one." Marcus was set down his teapot and pulled a document from his briefcase, laying it on the table. "This afternoon, a fund called Aurora Capital sent us a preliminary letter of intent through our financial advisor. They're not looking for a minority stake. They want a controlling restructuring." The room fell instantly silent. "Aurora Capital?" Another director frowned. "Never heard of it. Where did it come from?" "Registered in Switzerland. Assets under management approximately 6 to 8 billion yuan. Specializes in long-term investments in high-end manufacturing and cultural heritage industries. There are traces of the National Social Security Fund among its LPs. He tapped the document with his finger. Most critically, they have an extraordinarily detailed understanding of our company's situation. Our financial lodong holes, our patent disputes, our management structure, our supplier lists. The due diligence report they produced is more thorough than anything we've done internally. How is that possible? It means someone behind the scenes is pulling the strings. Hui's gaze slowly swept across every face in the conference room, and has been pulling them for a very long time. No one responded. The only sounds were the low hum of the air conditioning and the click of lighters. 3 days later at dusk, Kiln was in his shop, grinding the countertop for Mrs. Zhang's new stove. The angle grinder screamed, sparks showering the floor. Finn pushed through the curtain, a bag of tangerines in his hand. He set them on the workbench. Kiln, new fruit shop opened at the end of the alley. Tangerines are really sweet. He was cut off by the sound of a car engine. A black Audi A8 pulled up at the mouth of the alley, its body polished to a mirror shine, utterly incongruous with the rutted, muddy lane. The door opened and a middle-aged man in a gray suit, hair meticulously combed, stepped out. He looked around the alley, visibly taken aback by its dilapidated state. Moss growing on the cobblestones, scrap heaped against the walls, a yellow dog dozing by the sewer grate. He hesitated for a few seconds before walking in. His leather shoes splashed through puddles on the uneven stones. He frowned, but quickly recovered his professional blank expression. The man stopped in front of the tile shop and looked at the figure crouched on the ground, grinding a countertop. When he spoke, his voice was careful. "Excuse me, are you Mr. Kiln Shaw?" Kiln shut off the grinder and looked up. His face was covered in white stone dust, his work jacket coated in grime, the soles of his flip-flops worn paper-thin. He studied the stranger, didn't recognize him, but the suit's fabric and cut were quality, the briefcase was Montblanc, the shoes were hand-stitched. "That's me. Mr. Shaw, I'm..." The middle-aged man paused, as if weighing his words. "I'm the Deputy Secretary General of the National Ceramics Industry Association. My name is Zhang. I apologize for the unannounced visit. Our association has been sorting through the posthumous materials of your late father, Mr. Theodore Shaw, and we've discovered some things. Come in." Kiln cut him off, stood, dusted himself off, and pushed open the iron door leading to the back room. Deputy Secretary General Zhang followed him into the cramped space, less than 100 square feet, and his eyes swept the room. His pupils involuntarily dilated. The metal walls were covered in glaze formula charts and firing curves, every chart dense with data and molecular structure diagrams. A workbench made from an old door held several unfinished ceramic pieces, the greenware of a celadone lotus vase, a set of white porcelain teaware molds mid-carving, several glazed test tiles with different formulations. In the corner sat a small electric kiln. Beside the kiln mouth were stacked bags of mineral raw materials, each labeled in marker, Jingda Jun Kaolin, Longquan purple gold clay, Rougeau agate powder. But what made Zhang unable to look away was a celadone bowl sitting on the nightstand. The body was a perfect sky blue, the glaze lustrous as jade, the crackle pattern fine and even as cicada wings. The glaze color glowed with a faint blue fluorescence under the dim yellow light, like the cleanest patch of sky just after rain. On the foot was a hand-incised signature, Theodore. Slender gold calligraphy, every stroke distinct, bone and sinew clear. Zhang's breathing suddenly quickened. He walked over quickly, crouched down to examine the bowl. From his pocket, he pulled out a pair of reading glasses, put them on, and held his breath as he studied it for a full 3 minutes. He lifted a finger toward the rim, didn't touch it, just hovered a millimeter from the glazed surface, like a man reaching toward a sacred relic he dared not disturb. "This is..." His voice was shaking. "This is the last piece Theodore Shaw ever worked on, the clear sky after rain glaze. Our association searched every major museum and auction house in the country for 5 years. We thought it had been destroyed. It wasn't." Kiln wiped his hands on a rag, his tone indifferent. "My uncle smashed 800 pieces. I pulled this one out of the debris. There was a small chip. I repaired it myself. 2 sets of formula data were missing. I calculated them myself. Zhang drew a deep breath, stood, and pulled a red letterhead document from his briefcase, offering it with both hands. The document header read, "Official letter regarding the invitation of a fellow of the International Ceramic Materials Society to participate in the International Forum on Chinese Ceramic Culture." The footer bore the official seal of the Ministry of Culture. "Mr. Shaw, I did not come today in the name of the association to offer condolences or apologies, though we do owe your family an apology." Zhang's tone turned solemn. "I came to formally invite you to participate in the International Forum on Chinese Ceramic Culture, to be held next month at the National Convention Center in Beijing. This forum is hosted by the Ministry of Culture. It is the highest-level event in the ceramics field since the founding of the country. Participants include ceramic artists, scholars, museum directors, and materials science experts from 23 countries." Kiln took the document. He said nothing. Zhang continued, "While sorting through your father's academic legacy, we discovered a secret that has been hidden for 5 years. Before his death, Mr. Theodore Shaw had a joint research project with the Technical University of Munich. The project code was Firewatcher. The project lead used a Swiss encrypted email address. All research outcomes, including the digital restoration of Song Dynasty Imperial Kiln glazes, the non-toxic reformulation of Tang Dynasty Sankai lead glazes, and the nano-level kaolin purification process, were published in the most authoritative journals in the international ceramics field. On every paper, the corresponding author was listed as both Theodore Shaw and a collaborator named Firewatcher." He swallowed, looking at Kiln with a complicated expression. "We searched the global ceramics academic community and could not find this Firewatcher's real identity. Until last week, when we reviewed the case file of Damien Shaw's plagiarism case. The original work registration you filed with the U.S. Copyright Office also signed Firewatcher. Your fellowship with the International Ceramic Materials Society, also under Firewatcher. The 19 papers you published in top-tier journals, corresponding author, Firewatcher." The small room was silent for several seconds. The only sounds were a cat yowling outside the tin shed and children chasing each other in the distant alley, their laughter carrying on the wind. Kiln draped the rag over the workbench and turned to face Zhang. His expression was calm, like a glazed surface without a ripple. But deep in his eyes, something was slowly burning, a flame that had been suppressed for many years and finally no longer needed to be. "Mr. Zhang," he said, "my father's project had 3 core outcomes. First, the digital restoration of Song Dynasty Imperial Kiln glazes, solving the azure glaze coloration mechanism, problem that had baffled the ceramics academic community for nearly a century. Second, the non-toxic reformulation of Tang Dynasty Sankai low-temperature lead glazes, using rare earth elements to replace traditional lead compounds, passing EU-RoHS environmental standards. Third, the nano-level kaolin purification process, raising kaolin purity from industrial-grade 85% to electronic-grade 99.97%, a specification that surpasses the current best Japanese product on the global market." Zhang's pupils were dilating. He knew exactly what these numbers meant. The first was the holy grail of academia. Whoever solved it would write their name into the history of ceramics. The second was an urgent need in the environmental sector. The global market for Tang Sankai reproductions was worth over $20 billion a year, but traditional lead-based glazes were blocked from Western markets due to toxicity. The third was even more staggering. Nano-level high-purity kaolin was the core raw material for high-end electronic ceramic components. The global market had been monopolized by 2 Japanese companies for decades, priced by the gram, more expensive than gold. Any one of these 3 achievements standing alone was worth the market capitalization of a publicly listed company. "Which one does your association want?" Kiln asked. Zhang's weathered face flushed slightly. He straightened. "Mr. Shaw, I'm not here to negotiate. The association's position is this: we hope you will present these 3 achievements to the world at the forum, in your capacity as the academic heir of Theodore Shaw, so that the Chinese ceramics world can know that Theodore Shaw's spirit was not extinguished, that his research was not buried, that his son is still walking this path forward." Kiln did not answer immediately. He walked to the nightstand, picked up the Clear Sky After Rain bowl, and turned it over. Beside the incised Theodore on the foot, there was another line of characters, so small they had been scratched with the tip of a needle, the strokes fine as hair. You had to lean close to read them. Zheng leaned in and read aloud one word at a time. Kiln, carry on. His voice suddenly broke. As a man who had spent most of his life in the ceramics industry, he knew the weight of those words all too well. It was a dying craftsman at the very end, handing his son not money, not fame, not position, but the fire in his hands that had not yet finished burning. Kiln set the bowl back in its place and turned around. His gaze was like porcelain fresh from the kiln, hard and warm at the same time. I'll go. After Zheng left, Kiln closed the iron door and sat alone in the darkness for a long time. The 3 monitors in front of him were still glowing. The left screen displayed an unanswered email. Sender: Aurora Capital Chief Risk Officer. Subject: Shaw Ceramics Restructuring Plan Final Draft. The right screen showed a message from Professor Humphrey. Firewatcher, I've finished reviewing your ternary phase diagram model. 3 revisions sent to your email. The center screen held an open Word document, the cursor blinking after a line of text. Research on the coloration mechanism of Song Dynasty Imperial Kiln Azure Glaze. A comprehensive analysis based on molecular spectroscopy and crystal field theory. He picked up his phone, thought about calling someone, scrolled through his contacts, and eventually put it down. His mother was still lying in the rehabilitation hospital. The only person he could call was a living ghost. He put on his jacket and went out. The old van drove through the night across half the city, stopping in the parking lot of the rehabilitation hospital on the north side. Kiln walked into the familiar room on the 3rd floor of the inpatient wing. His mother, Lena Zhou, lay quietly on the bed, the ventilator screen pulsing with steady green waves. Her eyes were closed. Her face was gray-white. She had held the same posture for 5 years. Kiln sat down beside the bed. From his pocket, he took out the Clear Sky After Rain bowl and placed it beside her hand. Mom, I got an invitation today to go to Beijing to present Dad's research at the Global Ceramics Forum. His voice was very soft, as if he were talking to himself. They want me to stand in front of the whole world and tell them that Theodore Shaw is not dead. That what he left behind is still here. On the ventilator screen the green waves pulsed, one after another, unchanged. Kiln took his mother's hand. It had been like this for 5 years, warm, soft, utterly unresponsive. Wait for me to come back, Mom. He stood, tucking the bowl back into his pocket. When I do, I'm going to fire that kiln again. A week later, Kiln appeared at the archaeological excavation site of the ancient kiln in the South District, wearing the credentials of a specially appointed ceramics restoration expert for the National Cultural Heritage Administration. The site was a provincial-level protected heritage unit. The test pits had revealed the complete remains of a Tang Dynasty dragon kiln. Kiln bed, firebox, flue slag pit, in astonishingly good condition. The archaeology team had been excavating here for 2 years, and had unearthed tens of thousands of ceramic shards and kiln tools from the Tang and Song periods. The academic value was immense. But Shaw Ceramics had acquired the commercial development rights to this land, with plans to build a ceramics museum as part of the Aurora Cultural Park. According to the final approved blueprint signed by Harold Shaw, the museum's foundation needed to be dug to a depth of 12.7 meters, precisely enough to shave off the entire Tang Dynasty cultural layer beneath. The archaeology team had been given a different set of blueprints. The agreement version stated a foundation depth of 6 meters. Harold had signed it, stamped it with the company seal, and pledged to strictly respect the Cultural Relic Protection Red Line. But in the final version filed with the Planning Bureau, 6 meters had been changed to 12.7 meters. The extra 6.7 meters were used to add 3 basement levels, retail space, parking, and an equipment floor. This single alteration added 20,000 square meters of commercial space. At the average retail price of $40,000 per square meter in the surrounding area, that was an extra $800 million in value. When Kiln spread both sets of blueprints before Captain Jiang, the gray-haired old archaeologist was silent for a long time. He pulled off his dirt-caked gloves and traced the elevation lines on the blueprints with his finger twice. Then he stood and roared into his walkie-talkie the command that brought the entire construction site to a halt. All work stops. Everyone withdraw from the work face. Now. Immediately. The roar of machinery on the site ground to a halt. Excavators stopped. Bulldozers stopped. The concrete pump truck stopped. The on-site project manager for Shaw Ceramics, a balding, heavy-set man in his 40s named Tion, came charging out of the prefab office, waving his arms. What's going on? Who ordered a shutdown? Every day of delay is an $800,000 penalty. Who's going to pay for that? He choked mid-sentence when he saw the young man in work clothes standing beside Captain Jiang, and the expert badge on that young man's chest, which clearly read, Specially Appointed Ceramics Restoration Expert, National Cultural Heritage Administration. Tion's face cycled through red and white. His lips moved for a long moment before he managed. Kiln Shaw? How did you? That's me. Kiln tucked the blueprints back into his pocket. Manager Tion, please inform your company's current caretaker, Director Marcus Hua. The construction permit for this site is suspended, effective today. The National Cultural Heritage Administration will re-review the project's Cultural Relic Protection Plan. Until a new plan is approved, not one shovelful of dirt moves on this site. Sweat rolled down Tion's temples. He pulled out his phone and walked away to make a call. Kiln did not wait for him. He crouched down and began cleaning a freshly unearthed ceramic shard in the test pit with a hand trowel. It was a piece that had emerged from the deepest stratum of the west wall, the Tang Dynasty layer. The glaze was green tinged with yellow, the body fine and dense, the surface carrying a thin, glassy luster. You kiln miceware. When the craftsman over 1,000 years ago had pulled it from the kiln, he probably hadn't thought it anything special. But now, as Kiln gently brushed away the dirt with his trowel, the entire shard glowed with a warm, restrained light under the sun, like a pool of spring water sealed for a millennium suddenly breached. Captain Jiang, send this piece for thermoluminescence dating. He placed the shard in a specimen bag and handed it to Jiang. If the date can be confirmed to the late Tang, it'll be direct evidence of a local kiln production site. Jiang took the specimen bag and carefully placed it in the sample case. He watched Kiln continue crouching at the edge of the pit, cleaning shards, his fingers steady as a precision instrument, every push of the trowel accurate to the millimeter. Fragment after fragment emerged into the light in his hands, numbered, photographed, catalogued, like lost children finally returning home. Your father would be proud of you if he were still here, Jiang said quietly. Kiln's hand paused, then resumed cleaning. He didn't turn around. His voice was just slightly softer than before. I know. That night, Kiln was in his small room organizing the day's archaeological notes when his phone rang. The caller ID was an unfamiliar number. He answered. The voice on the other end introduced himself. Marcus Hua, independent director of Shaw Ceramics. The old man's voice was hoarse and low, carrying the weary weight of years. He came straight to the point, no preamble. Kiln, I know I failed your father. Kiln listened in silence. When your uncle forced your father to hand over his formulas, I abstained at the board meeting. I didn't help him, but I didn't help your father either. I told myself it wasn't my business. I told myself it was a Shaw family matter, and I was an outsider who shouldn't interfere. But I knew your father was innocent. His voice trembled, like the wall of an old kiln suddenly cracking under high heat. I knew and I did nothing. That is my debt. I've owed it for 5 years. Kiln still said nothing. He leaned back in his chair, looking at the dim bulb overhead. A few small insects circled the bulb, their wings making faint crackling sounds as they struck the glass. I've spent 50 years in the ceramics industry. I watched your father grow from a boy into a master, and I watched helpless as he was destroyed. His voice grew hoarser. Shaw Ceramics is on the verge of collapse. That bastard Harold hollowed out the company. The cash on hand is less than 300 million. But the short-term bank loans alone are over 4 billion. Supplier debts are over 600 million. Workers haven't been paid in 2 months. There are vultures circling, offering to buy the company at fire sale prices. 800 million, a billion. Not even a tenth of what the land alone is worth. He paused and drew a deep breath. But there are still over 3,000 workers in this company who depend on these wages to feed their families. Their wives, their children, their elderly parents, the mortgages they pay every month. All of it depends on this factory. Dozens of suppliers, the small ones with a few 100,000 tied up in Shaw, the big ones with hundreds of millions. If they don't get paid, they'll go down too. I'm not pleading for Harold, he deserves what he got. Give him however many years, he deserves everyone. But can you give the company a way to survive? Give those 3,000 workers a way to survive. The line was silent for a long time. So Long Hua thought the call had been dropped. Then Kiln spoke. Chairman Hua, do you know what my father said to me before he died? What? He said, making porcelain is like being a person. The body must be true. The glaze must be pure. The firing must be steady. If any one of those is wrong, the entire kiln is wasted. Kiln's voice was unhurried, but every word landed with the solid weight of clay pressed into a mold. Shaw Ceramics right now has a warped body. The foundation Harold built on fake blueprints, fake materials, and fake books can be kicked over with a single blow. Its glaze is dirty. Damien's plagiarism and fraud have rotted the company's brand reputation to the core. Its firing is chaotic. The capital chain is about to snap. Management has been arrested. Banks and suppliers are blockading the doors demanding payment. There's only one way for it to survive. Tell me. Full restructuring. All shares held by the Harold Shaw family and its affiliates will be transferred to a strategic investor at the bankruptcy liquidation ratio determined by the court. The entire existing management will be removed, including every member of the Shaw family. The investor will rebuild the board and management team. Those who should be replaced will be replaced. Those who should be cut will be cut. The company will fully cooperate with judicial authorities in investigating the financial heidong, black holes, and illegal conduct of the past 5 years. Those who should be held accountable will be held accountable. Those who should pay compensation will pay compensation. Every case. Not a single one missed. Hua inhaled sharply. Who is this strategic investor you're talking about? Aurora Capital. This fund has already acquired 14% of Shaw Ceramics tradable shares through the secondary market. At the same time, it has reached debt-to-equity agreements with the 3 largest creditors. If we add the portion of the Harold Shaw family's equity that will be judicially auctioned, Aurora Capital's stake will reach 41% after restructuring. A muffled thud came from the other end. The sound of Marcus was sinking back into his chair. The old man's breathing grew heavy. He was silent for a full half-minute. Then in a low voice tinged with a resigned, bitter smile, he asked, Aurora Capital. It's yours, isn't it? Kiln did not deny it. I checked Aurora Capital's registration records. Canton of Zug, Switzerland. Founded 3 years ago. The first LP was the Family Office of Union Bank of Switzerland. The second LP was the Endowment Fund of the Technical University of Munich. The third LP, Hua let out a short laugh. The third LP came in through a BVI company, 7 layers of equity structure. The ultimate beneficial owner is you. Honestly, that shell you built is so well constructed that if you hadn't deliberately left a crack for me to find, I never would have known. I left it for you to find on purpose, Kiln said. Hua was silent for a beat, then burst into laughter. A rasping, weathered sound like an old kiln that had been sealed for years suddenly catching fire again. Flames flickering through the cracks in the walls. Good. You're tougher than your father. And you'll get things done. I'll stake what's left of my life on you. When Aurora Capital comes in, I'll work with you on the handover. Every one of Harold's rotten accounts, we'll dig them up one by one. The call ended. Kiln set down his phone and walked to his mother's bedside. She lay there quietly, the ventilator making its soft, rhythmic sound. He sat down and took her hand. Mom, that kiln. I'm going to fire it up again. Understand. 2 months later. Beijing. The National Convention Center. The main hall of the International Forum on Chinese Ceramic Culture was packed to capacity. Over 400 ceramic artists, materials scientists, archaeologists, and museum directors from 23 countries had gathered. On the massive screen above the podium, high-resolution images of ancient Chinese masterpieces cycled in a loop: Ru Kiln sky blue, Guan Kiln powder green, Gu Kiln plum green, Jun Kiln rose purple, Ding Kiln white glaze. Every piece was a national treasure, the foot of each bearing the names of craftsmen from 1,000 years ago. Most of those names had been forgotten by history, but their skill had flowed like an invisible river, from the Tang to the Song, from the Song to the Ming and Qing, from the Ming and Qing to today. Kiln stood behind the curtain backstage, wearing a dark gray mandarin collared suit. Finn had dragged him out to buy it. 2,800 yuan. Finn had secretly paid while Kiln was in the fitting room. When Kiln tried to transfer him the money afterward, Finn shoved his phone into his pocket and said, "It looks better on you than it ever would on me. Consider it a sponsorship." Kiln didn't press further. Vivian Wen stood beside him, adjusting his collar. The young archaeologist was dressed in a navy suit, her hair pulled back in a clean, efficient ponytail. She had flown back from an archaeological dig in Gansu a week ago. She was leading the excavation of a newly discovered Tang Dynasty kiln site there. When she got Kiln's message, she immediately requested leave from her institute and bought a red-eye flight back. She had met Kiln 2 months earlier, during the shutdown of the ancient kiln site. That day, she had been sent as a representative of the Provincial Archaeology Institute for on-site assessment. She had seen a young man in work clothes and an archaeology team captain arguing fiercely over the dating of a single ceramic shard. The two of them had crouched beside the test pit for 2 hours, each pulling out magnifying glasses, color cards, glaze comparison samples, and thermoluminescence data, arguing from vessel shape, glaze color, body texture, and incised decoration style all the way to the reduction atmosphere control techniques of Tang Dynasty kilns. In the end, they had both fallen silent at the same moment. Both of them were right. They had simply been approaching it from different angles. From the perspective of kiln thermodynamics, Vivian was right. From the perspective of glaze mineralogy, Kiln was right. After that, Vivian had become a regular visitor to the old alley. She usually came at dusk, carrying a massive backpack stuffed with ceramic fragments from her dig sites and the smell of earth. Kiln would make tea, and they would sit at the workbench discussing a single shard deep into the night, sometimes until 2 or 3 in the morning. Finn, in the hardware store next door, could overhear fragments of their conversation: carbon-14 calibration curve, thermoluminescence sensitivity, Sagar reduction atmosphere, eutectic point of feldspar glaze. Out of every 10 words he understood maybe 1. "Nervous?" Vivian asked. "Not nervous," Kiln said. "I've been preparing for 5 years." The host announced his name. "Please welcome Senior Research Fellow of the International Ceramic Materials Society, Specially Appointed Ceramics Restoration Expert of the National Cultural Heritage Administration, and Academic Heir of Mr. Theodore Shaw, Mr. Kiln Shaw." Kiln drew a deep breath and walked out from behind the curtain. The spotlight fell on him. 1,000 pairs of eyes turned toward him simultaneously. In his sharply tailored dark gray suit, he looked nothing like the tile shop owner who crouched in flip-flops smoking at the mouth of an alley. But the light in his eyes was the same, the light of kiln fire. Not scorching, but something you couldn't stare at for too long. He did not pause. He walked directly to the podium, inserted his USB drive, and opened the first slide. What appeared on the screen was not his own introduction, not an award certificate, not a list of titles. It was a black and white photograph. An old dragon kiln. A middle-aged man in a white lab coat teaching a teenage boy how to measure kiln temperature with a pyrometer. The man's face was flushed red from the kiln fire, sweat pouring down his forehead, but his eyes were smiling. The boy's eyes danced with leaping flames, and he was smiling too, holding a freshly fired celadone bowl in his hands, its glaze glowing with a faint blue-green light in the setting sun. Below the photo, a handwritten line in slender gold calligraphy. Master Theodore instructs his disciple, autumn of the year of the dog. Kiln, age 14. This is my father, Theodore Shaw. Kiln's voice came through the microphone, steady and powerful, without excess ornament. Master of Chinese ceramic arts and crafts. National-level intangible cultural heritage inheritor of wood-fired kiln techniques. academic leader of the Song Dynasty 5 Great Kills Formula Restoration Project. He died 5 years ago. He paused. The entire hall was so silent you could hear your own heartbeat. Before he died in his hospital bed, he finished his final 3 papers. He completed the digital restoration of Song Dynasty Imperial Kiln glaze formulas, the non-toxic reformulation of Tang Sankai lead glazes, and the nano-level kaolin purification process, 3 core achievements. His body could no longer move. Liver failure. Kidney failure. He didn't even have the strength to lift his hand. He dictated. A nurse typed for him 1 character at a time. The night he finished the last paper, he passed. Kiln advanced to the second slide. It was a photograph of a hospital care record, dated 2 days before Theodore Shaw's death. The record read, "Patient in fair spirits today. Dictated paper for approximately 3 hours, pausing frequently to rest. During dictation, patient mentioned the need to speed up. Time is running out." Then he died. Kiln's tone suddenly changed. No longer the steady academic report, but something cold, carrying the edge of a blade. Every word landed like a piece of quenched ceramic, sharp, hard, cold to the touch. His 47 patents were transferred to his own younger brother for 1 yuan each. Total, 47 yuan. All of his original design manuscripts were plagiarized and signed by his nephew, who entered them in international competitions and won gold medals. The 800 pieces of rare ceramics he had collected over a lifetime, 40 years of traveling to over 100 ancient kiln sites across the country, 1 piece at a time, were smashed to pieces in his own courtyard. Kiln pressed play. A recording came through the speakers, carrying the distinctive echo of a hospital room and the background noise of a ventilator. A hoarse voice, barely audible, each word dragged out as if it cost the last of a life's strength. "The glaze formulas must not break." Silence. An old Japanese professor in the front row removed his glasses and polished them for a long time. His head bowed. A French museum director pressed her fingers to her lips, her eyes reddening. Professor Humphrey, the titan of global ceramics materials science, seated dead center in the 3rd row, had not moved since the moment Kiln began speaking. He sat like a sculpture welded to his chair. Kiln shut off the recording and switched to the next slide. What appeared was a set of comparison images. On the left, Damien Shaw's award certificate from the Singapore International Ceramic Design Competition. On the right, the U.S. Copyright Office Original Registration Certificate, Registrant, Firewatcher, registration date 2 full years before Damien's competition entry. Firewatcher. It means the one who guards the kiln. Kiln's gaze swept the room, his voice steady but every word carrying undeniable force. "This was the code name my father gave me," he said. "For those who make ceramics, the most important thing is not skill. Skill can be practiced, formulas can be learned, kilns can be built. The most important thing is to guard the fire. If the kiln fire does not go out, the craft will not break." He continued advancing through the slides. Every page was a hard technical achievement. Every page had detailed data, charts, and experimental records. Spectrographic analysis of the mineral composition of Song Dynasty Imperial Kiln glazes. The Rongrong-Chirjian melting range, in the ternary phase diagram, was precise to within plus or minus 5 degrees Celsius. The Nihedu fit, between the firing curve optimization models, predicted values and experimental results reached are superscript 2 equals 0.9987. The coloration mechanism of Guan Kiln Azure glaze was fully Jieshi analyzed. It was not simply iron-ion coloration, but a dynamic equilibrium between phase superscript 2 and phase superscript 3 under reduction atmosphere at specific cooling rates, combined with Rayleigh scattering effects from nanoscale phase-separated structures within the glaze layer, together producing that visual effect of the color of sky after rain where clouds break. The non-toxic reformulation of Tang Sankai lead glazes, rare earth elements cerium oxide and lanthanum oxide, replaced the lead oxide in traditional formulas, screened through 300 sets of orthogonal experiments to identify the optimal ratio. Toxicity leaching comparative data. Traditional lead-based glaze leached 120 mg of lead per liter, exceeding EU-RoHS standards by 40 times. The reformulated lead-free glaze leached 0.3 mg per liter, below EU limits. Color fidelity reached over 97% of the traditional formula. Nano-level Kiln purification. Transmission electron micrographs clearly showed the particle size distribution of the purified Kiln, median particle size D50 of 87 nanometers, specific surface area of 42 square meters per gram. This specification surpassed the current best Japanese product on the global market. In the field of high-end electronic ceramic components, high-purity nanocalin was the core raw material for manufacturing multi-layer ceramic capacitors, a global market monopolized by Japanese companies for 30 years. Kalin's purification process cost only a third of the Japanese process. The experts in the audience began shifting in their seats. The old professor from Tokyo University of the Arts pushed up his glasses and began scribbling furiously in his notebook. Mid-scribble, he stopped and leaned over to murmur to a colleague beside him. If this data is real, the competitive advantage of Japan's Kiln industry will be comprehensively overtaken within 5 years. The director of the Sèvres National Ceramics Museum in France sat with her hands folded on the table, staring expressionlessly at the screen, but her fingers were trembling slightly. The instinctive physiological response of a ceramics industry professional witnessing a paradigm-shifting technological breakthrough. Professor Humphrey had removed his reading glasses the moment Kiln began presenting the second set of data. His body was leaning forward. His gaze was welded to the screen. His hand rested on the table, fingers unconsciously tapping an accelerating rhythm. When Kiln flipped to the final page, a comprehensive comparison table of the 3 achievements, each column marked industrial validation complete, Professor Humphrey was the first to stand. He did not speak. He simply began to applaud. Then a second person, a third, a 50th, a 200th. The entire hall rose. The applause roared up like flames inside a kiln, overwhelming, all-encompassing, shaking the chandeliers overhead. Someone whistled. Someone wiped the corner of their eye with the back of their hand. Someone was typing furiously on their phone, posting to Twitter. An old craftsman from Jingdezhen pressed his palms together and bowed deeply in Kalin's direction. Vivian applauded fiercely from the audience, her eyes red as a freshly glazed piece of greenware. Finn stuck his fingers in his mouth and let out a whistle that cracked through the hall. The person next to him glared. Finn just grinned, completely unrepentant. Kiln stood at the podium. He did not bow. He did not say thank you. He simply flipped the presentation to the final slide. It was empty except for a single photograph. A bowl the color of clear sky after rain. The foot turned upward, the incised signature Theodore. Beside it, another line of characters smaller than the point of a needle. He enlarged the photo, enlarged it again, enlarged it until those characters filled the entire screen. Kiln, carry on. The applause halted for a single beat. Everyone in the room read those words at the same moment, then returned louder than before. Someone wept aloud. Someone stood and raised both hands above their head, applauding with everything they had. Someone shouted the name Firewatcher. When Kiln stepped down from the podium, Professor Humphrey stopped him in the aisle. The old professor, white-haired, deep-set eyes, his gaze sharp as a freshly quenched blade, looked at Kiln for a full 5 seconds. Then, in heavily accented English, he spoke a sentence that everyone present would remember. "Your father is not dead." The glazed color he fired, "It's still in your eyes." Kiln was silent for 3 seconds. Then he lowered his head and bowed. A deep, solemn bow. "Understand. 3 months later, the bankruptcy restructuring plan for Shaw Ceramics was approved at a special shareholder meeting. All equity held by the Harold Shaw family and its affiliates was forcibly auctioned by court order. Aurora Capital, as the strategic investor, won the controlling stake with a bid of $4.1 billion and became the new owner of Shaw Ceramics. Marcus Hua fulfilled his promise. At the handover ceremony, he personally placed the Shaw Ceramics corporate seal into Kiln's hands. The seal was made of brass, engraved with the 10 characters of Shaw Ceramics Group Company Limited, its edges worn smooth by the passage of years. Hua's hand trembled as he passed it over. "This seal. Your father held it once," the old man said. "He held it for 3 years before it was stolen from him. Now you're taking it back." Kiln took the seal and weighed it in his palm. The brass was solid, heavy, cool to the touch. Chairman Hua. Thank you. Don't thank me. Hua waved his hand. The best decision I ever made was making that phone call to you that night. On the same day, the first instance verdicts for Harold Shaw and Damien Shaw were handed down. Harold Shaw for embezzlement, trade secret infringement, forgery of official documents and seals, fraudulent export tax rebates, intentional destruction of cultural relic sites, and a total of 9 charges, was sentenced to 20 years in prison, deprived of political rights for 5 years, with confiscation of all personal assets. When the judge finished reading the verdict, Harold Shaw stood in the defendant's dock. His legs buckled, and the bailiffs caught him. Damien Shaw, for copyright infringement and design plagiarism, was sentenced to 3 years in prison, suspended for 4, and ordered to pay a total of $23 million in economic damages and emotional distress compensation to the copyright holder Kiln Shaw. When he heard the number $23 million, he shot up from the defendant's dock and was shoved back down by the bailiffs. Marcus Su, before the trial even began, voluntarily confessed and turned state's witness, providing full details of how Harold Shaw had directed him to steal Kiln's original design manuscripts and give false testimony. Due to his voluntary surrender and meritorious service, he received a reduced sentence of 2 years, suspended for 3. As he was led out of the courtroom after sentencing, he passed Damien in the corridor. Their eyes met. Damien's lips moved, silently mouthing 2 words. Marcus lowered his head. Kiln did not attend the sentencing. He went to the ancient Kiln site instead. The Tang Dynasty Dragon Kiln site that Shaw Ceramics had torn apart was now fully protected. Steel-framed protective shelters had been erected over the test pits. The unearthed shards had been numbered and catalogued, stored in climate-controlled specimen cabinets. Vivian's archaeology team was doing the final systematic organization work, with plans to publish a complete excavation report the following year. Under the first directive Kiln had issued after taking control of Shaw Ceramics, this ancient kiln site would be preserved in place. No commercial buildings would be constructed on top of it. The original Aurora Cultural Park plan was completely scrapped. In its place would be an ancient kiln site museum, all commercial space cut, the basement reduced to a single equipment level meeting only the minimum requirements for cultural relic preservation, the above-ground building height restricted to no higher than the highest point of the site's protective shelters. The museum's design was drawn by Kiln himself. The overall architectural form was taken from the curve of a Tang Dynasty dragon kiln. A long rising line following the mountain slope, the roof a flowing glazed surface. At the entrance stood a recreated Tang Dynasty kiln door. All building materials were locally sourced, stone from the mountain, sand from the river, waste kiln bricks excavated from the site itself. On the title page of his design brief, he had written a single line: "Every kiln is a container of time. Before it is opened, you don't know whether what lies inside is treasure or waste. But you must guard the fire." He stood now at the edge of the test pit, holding the clear sky after rain bowl in his hands. The setting sun shone from behind him, casting his shadow and the shadow of the bowl together onto the Tang Dynasty stratum of the west wall, that stratum still embedded with unexcavated shards, glinting with scattered points of blue-green light in the sunset. Vivian climbed up out of the pit, dusted the dirt from her knees, and walked over to stand beside him. Her hard hat was smeared with mud. The cuffs of her work jacket were frayed. Her fingernails were permanently embedded with unremovable yellow earth. "What are you thinking about?" "My father." Kiln turned the bowl over. The glaze glowed with a warm celadone light in the sunset, the crackle lines fine as strands of hair, every line unique, like a human fingerprint. He fired ceramics his whole life. This was the piece he was most satisfied with. But he always said the best one should be the next one. "So where's your next one?" Kiln turned his head and looked toward the distant ridge line. That was where the Tang Dynasty dragon kilns had once stood, kilns stacked layer upon layer along the mountain, over 1,000 craftsmen firing simultaneously at the peak of the era, their flames lighting up half the sky, the kiln smoke spiraling among the peaks without dispersing. Now the mountain was covered in weeds and brush. The kilns had long since collapsed. The kiln bricks had been washed into the ravines by rain. Only a few sections of ruined kiln walls still flickered in and out of visibility among the wild grass, like the skeletal remains of some colossal creature forgotten in the wilderness. "There." He raised his hand and pointed to the mountainside. I'm going to rebuild my father's kiln. Using the Song Dynasty formulas he restored. Using the Tang Dynasty dragon kiln form. And fire a kiln of true imperial azure glaze. Vivian followed his finger. The sun was sinking below the ridge, the last rays gilding the entire mountain in a wash of gold and red. The ruined sections of kiln wall became dark silhouettes against the backlight, like a line of unfinished writing suspended between heaven and earth. She suddenly remembered the first time she had seen Kiln, crouched at the edge of a test pit, cleaning shards with a hand trowel. His movements had been so steady, his focus so absolute, as if he were touching time itself. She had known in that moment that this man had a kiln inside him that had not yet been lit. He was waiting for the right moment to fire it again. I'll help you, she said. Kiln turned to look at her. The sunset fell across her profile, softening her outline with a gilded edge. Her hard hat was crooked. Her face was still smudged with dirt from the pit. Her hair was mussed and messy, a loose strand falling from behind her ear and drifting in the evening breeze. But when she smiled, she looked like a piece of you kiln mice were freshly unearthed. Not flashy, not dazzling, but carrying a warmth and steadiness that only came from being buried for 1,000 years. It was the first time he noticed that a woman's smile could be this beautiful.
Understand.
A year later, the old kiln on the mountainside had been rebuilt. Its form followed the mountain's contours in the traditional dragon kiln style, 36 meters long, sloping upward along the mountain's natural gradient, divided into 3 sections: head, body, and tail. Each section had its own independent firebox and viewing ports. The kiln walls were rammed from local refractory clay mixed with crushed porcelain powder, every inch of the walls pounded into place by old craftsmen, hammer blow by hammer blow. The roof was covered with a thick layer of straw-reinforced mud insulation. The straw had been collected by Finn, who had driven to the countryside, bundled it, and hauled it up the mountain on his back, load after load over 2 days, until his shoulders were raw. Every construction technique strictly followed the records in the Song Dynasty texts Tiangong Kaiwu, Anding Zhao Fashi. Not a single nail was used. Not a single piece of cement. Not a single steel bar. The entire kiln was built using the most ancient methods. Kiln said that kilns had memory. A kiln built with modern materials would produce ceramics that carried the scent of machines. Only a kiln built from the 4 primordial elements, earth, fire, water, wood, could fire porcelain that held the spirit of the Song Dynasty masters. On the day of the firing, many people came. Franklin Bai stood at the front, leaning on his cane, wearing a faded blue cloth gown, his hair slightly disheveled by the mountain wind. Behind him were people from the Ceramics Association, the Heritage Administration, the Provincial Archaeology Institute, ceramic artisans and intangible cultural heritage inheritors from across the country. Someone had driven 3 days from Jingdezhen. Someone had taken an 8-hour high-speed train from Longquan. Someone had come from Dahua carrying their own fired ceramics to pay respects at the mountain. Finn had set up a small stall at the base of the mountain, hauling up a truckload of fruit and drinks with a hand-painted sign, Finn's Supply Station, everything free. He stood behind the counter in an old t-shirt printed with Kalen's tile shop, holding up a bottle of ice-cold cola, grinning like a contractor version of Santa Claus. Marcus Hui came too. He wore a faded Zhongshan suit, standing in an inconspicuous corner of the crowd, not pushing forward, just gazing at the kiln mouth from a distance. Beside him stood an old man with snow-white hair, Sebastian Shaw. The old patriarch leaned on his cane, his body far more stooped than before, his face carved with wrinkles like the dried cracks in an old kiln wall. No one had invited him. He had come on his own. He spoke to no one, just stood at the very edge of the crowd, leaning on his cane, his gaze traveling through the forest of heads to rest on the young man at the kiln mouth. Vivian stood beside Kiln, holding an infrared thermometer and a logbook. She wore her work jacket and hard hat, looking exactly as she had that day at the archaeological site, except now a ponytail hung beneath the hard hat. Kiln temperature 1300 degrees. Stable for 4 hours. Temperature differential between sections no more than 5 degrees. She checked the thermometer data. Reduction atmosphere holding well. Carbon monoxide concentration stable at 6%. You can stop now. Kiln nodded. He walked to the kiln door. The door was sealed with refractory bricks and yellow mud, the surface of the seal baked dry and white by the intense heat. He stopped before it and drew a deep breath. The air was thick with the charred fragrance of burning pine, and the dry heat radiating from the kiln. The heat wave struck his face like his father's palm, scalding, rough but reassuring. He raised the sledgehammer and struck the seal. The seal cracked open with a sharp report. High-temperature gases roared through the fissure, carrying the burnt fragrance of pine and the mineral volatiles of ceramic glazes at extreme heat. Kiln did not stop. Second blow. Third blow. Chunks of seal fell away. The kiln door swung open with a roar. A wave of scorching heat rushed out. The inner walls of the kiln mouth glowed a piercing orange-red, like a dragon that had slept for 1,000 years slowly opening its eyes. The entire kiln chamber was glowing dark red, orange-red, golden yellow, layers of radiance extending from the head to the tail, like a road paved with fire stretching into heaven. Kiln did not step back. He stood in the doorway, the heat turning his face crimson, sweat rolling down his temples. But his feet were rooted to the ground as if nailed there. He stared motionlessly into the depths of the kiln chamber. There, rows upon rows of saggers glowed with a dark red light in the heat, arranged in perfect order, like hearts still beating inside the body of a dragon. It was the next morning before the kiln had cooled enough for anyone to enter. Dawn light spilled over the ridge, gilding the entire dragon kiln with a pale gold. Mountain mist still hung in the air, wrapped around the mountainside like a white silk sash. Birdsong drifted from the forest, clear and distant. Kiln was the first to crawl inside. He climbed the sloping kiln passage, past the firebox at the kiln head, where unburned pine charcoal still glowed with residual heat, past the viewing ports along the kiln body, each opening looking into an independently temperature-controlled chamber, past the flue at the kiln tail, the coolest but most stable zone in the entire kiln. He lifted out each sagger one by one. Finn and Vivian received them at the kiln mouth, laying the still warm vessels in rows on a bed of straw spread across the ground. 1 row, 2 rows, 3 rows, 64 saggers in total, each one numbered, each one corresponding to a specific kiln position and a specific glaze formula. The crowd held its breath. Even the mountain wind dared not blow too loudly. Old craftsmen pressed their palms together in silent prayer. Young apprentices held up their phones to record, their hands trembling. Kiln lifted out the last sagger. This was the one placed in the most critical position, the middle section of the kiln body, where the temperature was the most stable and the reduction atmosphere the most uniform. The golden kiln position. In the lore of every old kiln master, what emerged from a sagger in this position was either a transcendent masterpiece or a kiln full of waste. There was no middle state. He set it on the ground, wiped the dust from his hands, and opened the lid. A wash of sky blue crashed into everyone's vision. It was a celadone bowl, the body a perfect sky blue, the glaze lustrous as jade, the crackle pattern fine as cicada wings. Under the early morning sun, it glowed with a faint blue fluorescence, like the cleanest patch of sky just after rain, sealed inside porcelain. The inner wall was carved with an extremely fine ring of interlocking lotus vines, every petal vividly alive, the lines flowing like water. On the foot was an incised signature, Theodore. Slender gold calligraphy. Every stroke distinct, bone and sinew clear. Exactly the same as the signature on the bowl Kiln had guarded for 5 years in that tin shed. Kiln lifted the bowl toward the rising sun. The light pierced through the eggshell-thin body, the thinnest areas less than 2 millimeters, blooming a soft halo around the rim. The entire bowl seemed not to be porcelain, but a lamp made of solidified daylight, glowing quietly in Kiln's palm. On the azure glazed surface, the crackle lines, backlit by the sun, looked like a miniature landscape painting mountains, streams, clouds, pine branches, all flickering in and out of visibility on that thin layer of glaze. My father's glaze formula. Kiln's voice trembled slightly, but every word was clear. Unbroken. A suppressed stir rippled through the crowd. A white-haired old craftsman took off his reading glasses and wiped his eyes fiercely, tears and sweat mingling as they ran through his fingers. a young intangible cultural heritage apprentice from Longquan, so excited he was trembling, raised his phone to take a photo, then after 2 shots, suddenly lowered the phone and bowed deeply toward the bowl in Kiln's hands. A ceramics collector from Beijing shouted an offer on the spot. 5 million. No, 8 million. Kiln smiled and shook his head, cradling the bowl carefully against his chest, like holding a newborn child. Finn threw an arm around Kiln's shoulder, nearly knocking him over. He opened his mouth and bellowed, "Kiln, you crazy bastard, you actually did it!" His voice was so loud it startled the birds off the mountainside. Vivian crouched down and carefully, with gloved hands, lifted the bowl and placed it under a portable magnifying glass. She studied it for a long time, the crackle pattern's trajectory across the glaze surface, the crystalline state of the body-glaze interface, the depth and angle of the incised lotus vine cuts, the stroke structure of the signature on the foot. Then she looked up, her eyes reddening, her lips moving as if she wanted to say something. In the end, all she said was, "The glaze is right." 4 words. Yet they carried more weight than any long speech. Because everyone present knew what those 4 words meant. They meant that the Song Dynasty Imperial Kiln Azure Glaze formula, lost for nearly 1,000 years, had been completely, precisely, authentically restored. By a young man who laid tiles in an old alley. In an old kiln rebuilt from ruins. It meant that one of the most mysterious technical codes in the history of Chinese ancient ceramics had been successfully cracked. It meant that from this day forward, China would no longer need to look up to anyone in the field of high-end ceramic materials. At the very edge of the crowd, Sebastian Shaw's hand, gripping his cane, was trembling violently. He looked at the bowl in Kiln's hands, his gaze traveling through the morning mist and the gaps between bodies, landing on the signature on the foot, Theodore. Those 2 characters. He had taught his eldest son, Theodore, to carve them. 50 years ago, beside the small kiln behind the old Shaw family house, he had held Theodore's hand and carved, stroke by stroke. Carved crooked, started over. Carved too shallow, deepened it. The first character he taught Theodore to carve was Shaw. The second was Theodore. And now, those characters had become an incised signature on a piece of porcelain. This piece of porcelain was the finest of all the things his most favored son had destroyed. It was the piece his most wronged grandson had pulled from the debris. The person who had fired this porcelain had used the formula he himself had taught, the formula left behind by the man he himself had cast out of the family with his own hands. Sebastian slowly bent down and leaned his cane against a tree trunk. From his pocket, he took out a small red cloth bundle, the size of his palm, and with trembling hands, placed it on the stone platform beside the kiln mouth that was used for offerings. Then he straightened his back, leaned on his cane, turned and walked down the mountain 1 step at a time. No one stopped him. No one called out to him. Everyone watched in silence as that stooped silhouette slowly disappeared into the morning mist and the pine forest. Vivian walked over and opened the red cloth bundle. Inside was a tiny celadone cup. On the foot was an incised signature, Theodore. The date, 50 years ago. A visible crack ran up the body of the cup, repaired with gold lacquer, the golden seam winding upward along the body like a scar gilded by the passage of time. It was the very first piece of song-style porcelain Sebastian Shaw had ever fired in his life. It was the witness to his own hands teaching his eldest son, Theodore, how to throw clay, apply glaze, and load a kiln. It was the only thing left, after the son he had favored most had destroyed everything. Understand. 2 years later, in the Asian Art Wing of the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York, a special exhibition was underway. Its title, Clear Sky, the contemporary rebirth of Song Dynasty Imperial Kiln craftsmanship. In the central display case alone stood the azure bowl Kiln had fired. The case was bulletproof glass. The temperature and humidity were precisely controlled to the optimal range for porcelain preservation. 21 degrees Celsius, 45% relative humidity. Spotlights were angled to cast the crackle pattern of the azure glaze into its most vivid, beautiful state. Beside the case, a large screen played a documentary on a loop. The film was called The Fire Watcher. It opened with a close-up of a clear sky after rain bowl. the foot slowly turning over to reveal the two characters Theodore, and beside them, the line of characters smaller than the point of a needle. The image then cut to an old alley at dawn. A young man in a blue work jacket crouched in the doorway of a tile shop, a half-smoked cigarette dangling from his lips, squinting at the advertisements plastered on the wall across the alley. A voiceover began, Kiln's own voice, calm and powerful. My father's greatest regret in his life was not that he was framed, not that everything was taken from him. It was that the glaze color he fired was still just a little short of the highest standard of the Song Dynasty imperial kilns. The difference was very, very small. Maybe the kiln temperature was off by 5 degrees. Maybe the reduction atmosphere was held 10 minutes too short. Maybe the concentration of some trace element in the glaze formula was off by 0.001%. But it was that tiny, tiny gap that he spent his entire life trying to close. Before he died, he told me he felt he had let down those old masters from 1,000 years ago. Let down the craftsmen who created the azure glaze. The image cut to him standing before the rebuilt dragon kiln, the kiln fire blazing behind him, his silhouette etched into a dark outline against the flames. He lifted the azure bowl from the kiln and raised it toward the rising sun, the light piercing through the eggshell-thin body, blooming a blue fluorescence across the bowl's surface. Now I've done it for him. At the end of the documentary, text slowly emerged. Kiln Shah, Fellow of the International Ceramic Materials Society, National-level Intangible Cultural Heritage Inheritor of Wood-Fired Kiln Techniques. Founder of Aurora Capital. The only person in the modern era to hold the complete glaze formulas of all 5 great kilns of the Song Dynasty. The Tang Dynasty Dragon Kiln he led the reconstruction of has been inscribed on the UNESCO Intangible Cultural Heritage Protection List. The Imperial Kiln Azure Glaze formula he restored has been permanently collected by both the British Museum and the Louvre. The azure bowl he donated to the nation has been designated a Class 1 cultural relic. The final frame showed him and Vivian standing side by side before that dragon kiln. The setting sun stretched their shadows long, all the way into the depths of the mountain. The mountain wind lifted Vivian's hair, blowing it across Kiln's shoulder. In Kiln's hand was a Tang Dynasty shard freshly excavated from the test pit. In Vivian's hand was an archaeology logbook. Their two silhouettes grew smaller in the frame until they finally merged into the sky full of golden light. At the end of the film, a single line of text slowly emerged. The kiln fire does not go out. On opening day, a special visitor came. Sebastian Shaw, alone, leaning on his cane, walked haltingly into the gallery. A staff member moved forward to assist him. He gently pushed them away. He stood before the display case holding the azure bowl for a very, very long time. So long that the other visitors in the gallery cycled through wave after wave. So long that the gallery lights switched from the natural light of day to the warm spotlights of evening. Still he stood there motionless. His eyes rested on the line of characters on the foot of the bowl, smaller than the point of a needle. Kiln carry on. That line 50 years ago, he had held Theodore's hand and carved it. Theodore had been 14 years old. He had just fired his first celadone bowl. His face flushed with excitement, and had run over holding the bowl asking, "Dad, what should I carve on the foot?" Sebastian had said, "Carve your name. Every craftsman's first piece should bear his own name." Theodore had thought for a moment, then picked up the needlepoint carving knife. On the foot of the bowl, he carved 2 characters, Theodore. Then beside them he carved 4 smaller characters. Kiln carry on. Sebastian had asked him, "What do those words mean?" Theodore had said, "Kiln is still too small. His hands aren't strong enough yet to throw clay. When he grows up, I'll pass my skills to him. He'll carry on the firing." That year, Kiln had just turned 1. Sebastian closed his eyes. He did not bow toward the display case. He placed nothing upon it. He simply stood there, eyes shut, his lips moving almost imperceptibly, as if speaking words no one could hear. A security guard, noticing the old man had been standing far too long, moved forward to inquire. The museum director, who was accompanying him, held out a hand to stop the guard. The director knew who this old man was. He also recognized the 2 cloudy tears that had gathered in the old man's eyes and never fallen. The old man finally turned. Leaning on his cane, he walked out of the gallery 1 step at a time. His silhouette disappeared through the massive glass doors of the Metropolitan Museum, merging into the streaming crowds of Fifth Avenue and the harsh sunlight of a New York afternoon. Inside the gallery, the Azure Bowl rested quietly in its display case. The glazed surface in its climate-controlled glass chamber glowed with a light unchanged by the passing of 1,000 years. The line of characters on the foot, beneath the pinpoint spotlights, was as clear as if it had been carved only yesterday. Kiln, carry on.